And I'm happy to have you say my age. I'm 61.
Oh, I saw that in your paperwork. I'm like, I
Yep.
love it. Oh, and also I won't put this, and I can tell them when to start the video with the recording. I don't do videos. That's also why I look like this. I'm like at home. I keep it super
Okay.
casual and just post the audio.
Okay.
Um,
Great.
but are you ready to jump in?
Yes.
All right. I am so excited to have you, Laurie. Oh, and one more thing I was going to tell you so you don't think it's weird. I will do your intro after and put
Perfect.
that in first and then bleed into it. So as we jump in, don't feel like I didn't introduce you because it's coming. It will be
Okay.
recorded after.
Yeah, I
Okay.
love it.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. Well, welcome to the show, Laurie. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Kristen.
So, this is a topic that we take a very, very individualized approach at Stat Wellness, and it's all about intermittent fasting. We're going to talk about, and I'm very excited to talk about intermittent fasting with a specialist and someone that's personally been intermittent fasting for over 7 years. And I'm interested to see her experience with coaching other people through this on what she's seen has been helpful, how to start, maybe where there's some problem areas, maybe when it's too much. So we're going to cover everything about intermittent fasting today. So Laurie, first, tell us about yourself and what got you to start intermittent fasting 7 years ago.
I was a fitness enthusiast and I'd been studying nutrition myself for 25 years since my late 20s. I quit sugar and I decided for myself that fueling myself well was a top priority. But I never wanted to be the food police, and I'm still not.
Yes.
And I just wanted to stay in my own lane and figure out for myself what was best for me. And there I was in my early to mid 40s, really at the top of my game, running marathons, fit, eating well, and perimenopause, which, by the way, they don't send us to biology school for older women. So it caught me completely by surprise. Perimenopause pushed me down a confusing, dark hole. And I didn't know it was happening. My body seemed like it was not my own. Just all sorts of symptoms that I didn't know were connected. And when my period stopped at age 49, which is early, the average is 52, I suddenly gained 50 pounds. What? Now, for someone who's paid attention to fitness and nutrition for many, many years, I knew what to do in the, what worked to, 5 pounds suddenly on. I know what to do to turn it around, or 10, or, God forbid, more. And nothing I'd done in the past made a difference. And I just kept feeling worse and getting heavier. And so after suffering and struggling, so it wasn't just the weight gain, it then became depression and my equilibrium, my balance was off, brain fog, memory loss, every joint, my hips from my elbows to my shoulders, everything hurt. And so after suffering and struggling and trying very hard for about 4.5 years, I suddenly heard about intermittent fasting, which came as a complete surprise because I thought that I was really aware of all the possible ways to feel better and heal yourself. And so I stayed up all night one night studying and watching videos and reading. And I was actually visiting my mom in Colorado at the time and had had a very tearful conversation with her. And the next morning, I shared with her that I was going to try this thing, which was to pause from eating. It seemed to match human physiology to thrive in a fasted state. It made sense to me. And that I was just going to push my eating out until later. And I started that very same day. And that was over 7 years ago. I was able to shed the 50 pounds in 15 months, which is very gradual. But the most important thing is that I felt so much better in 3 days. In 3 days, I was standing in my mom's kitchen and I had this thought, which was, it's hard to describe, but I was like, there I am. I was like back in my body. I was clear, sharp, focused, myself. And for your listeners who are in perimenopause or beyond, we really know what it feels like to not feel like ourselves. To feel sharp and bright and clear and strong again was everything. And that was just 3 days.
Well, and that story that you shared with like out of body, gaining 50 pounds very quickly. We work with a lot of perimenopausal and menopausal women at Stat Wellness. And you may kind of have a similar theory, but when you really think of pathophysiology, when our ovaries stop making hormones, our body tries to find somewhere to get estrogen, right? And
Correct.
you make estrogen in your ovaries and fat tissue. So your body starts to put on a lot of excess fat that you've never had before
That's right.
to try to make estrogen to help your body feel balanced. But it actually leads you to feeling much more imbalanced. And this is where a lot of our patients, and I'm so excited to bring in the intermittent fasting in this group of people, develop perimenopause. Pre-diabetes and diabetes. We started seeing insulin resistance, pre-diabetes, diabetes in our perimenopausal women that never had blood sugar issues before. So,
That's
and they
right.
didn't change anything in their diet and their lifestyle and their sleep. And now they went from an A1C of 5.1 to 5.9 in between a 6-month period. And they're very frustrated. So this, you are not alone. And I know you know that, but for all of our listeners, like it's not just a handful of women that go through this metabolic shift with perimenopause and menopause. It is, I would argue, every woman, unless you're really intentional and make a big change during the process. So, okay, you started intermittent fasting. What was like, how did you take it on at the beginning? What was your fasting window? How you said 3 days, you felt so much better, and you didn't change the
Yeah.
food you were eating in your eating window. You just changed the times you ate. That was the change you made, right?
That's right. I always say that I ate the exact same way when I was lean and fit. I ate the exact same way when I gained 50 pounds. And I ate the exact same way when I lost 50 pounds and felt a lot better. So, what was the difference? The hormone in the beginning, it was the hormonal chaos of perimenopause. And then to restore myself to myself, it was keeping an eating window and fasting clean. So, the way I started was I decided, well, I don't mind black coffee. And I'm not usually so hungry in the morning. I'm just going to see if I can fast until noon. And I did. And I thought I would have an 8 hour eating window from noon to 8. But the fact that I was home with my mom, we were eating dinner a lot earlier than I normally would. And so pretty quickly, that 8 hour eating window turned into about 6. And that felt so good to me. See, the most important thing I want to impart is the discovery of what each individual finds out has you feel your absolute best. And we want to be clear about what has us feel well. We want to be really tuned into what feeling good feels like, because then we prioritize it. And so for me, in the beginning, having 2 meals in a 6 hour eating window and pausing in between the meals, that's really an important factor, is eat a meal, feel satisfied, pause, eat another meal, feel satisfied, close the eating window. And that worked for me beautifully for about I don't know, 4, 5, 6 weeks. And then I shortened it because for me, appetite correction really kicked in and my body was saying, it felt so well in ketosis and in a fat burning state. There was plenty of fat for my body to fuel on. And so I shortened my eating window to 4 hours and had a small appetizer, a window opener, and a full big meal, a lot of food I enjoy eating. And I closed it up. And that was basically my schedule. I change it for as things come up, social things and special occasions and so forth. But mostly I loved my 4 hour eating window. And then I tried alternate day. I've tried all the schedules, alternate day fasting. And um, I find over these 7+ years now that still to this day, my body fat's 22%. I'm 61 years old. I am fit and I feel really well with a 4 hour eating window. Now, do I think that eating window is the best one? No, absolutely not. What's the best one is what each individual discovers for themselves based on your medication, your age, your body fat, your fitness, your daily schedule. I always tell people the way to figure out the best eating window for you are three factors. One is what has you feel your best. The second factor is what works with your life and the people in it, your daily schedule. And the third factor is what are your goals, your health and weight goals. And if you've got fatty liver disease or pre-diabetes or, whatever it is you're dealing with, excess weight, your goals, that third factor is really important to not lose sight of. But feeling well is a number one.
And tell us a little bit about the research that you've read and seen when it comes to intermittent fasting. And then I'll kind of fill in some of the gaps too, because I know there's obviously so much research in the space of intermittent fasting, but I want to hear some of the scientific reasons that you leaned into the intermittent fasting in the first place.
Oh my gosh. Well, the research is vast and deep, but I mean, from making new brain cells to lowering inflammation, when you get an email, it says, oh, what are the top foods to eat to lower inflammation? I'm like, well, the number one thing to do to lower inflammation is to fast, clean, and have an eating window and then sleep. And I mean, you can't eat your way into low inflammation, but cut out ultra processed food would be number one in terms of food. But there's just healing your gut and getting the visceral fat off your organs and getting into ketosis. And I mean, I don't know which direction to go in terms of research.
Well, I think one of the big places is this science, and you mentioned it with brain cells, but it's autophagy and mitophagy, right? So for listeners that don't know, autophagy is basically clearing off all of our like old cells so that we can have new cells. So even from like a skin, blood, red blood cells, all of these things, like we want to get this autophagy and clear out the dead old cells. And the same thing we're finding is with mitophagy, and that's mitochondrial cells, right? Like there's a lot of mitochondrial benefits in fasting. And then the other thing is when we don't eat as often, we have time for our blood sugar to actually come down, which is where a lot of the things you were talking about with the visceral fat, the liver. So, if the liver is having to process sugar all the time, which we know carbs are broken down into sugar, they have more of a chance of getting stored and causing some of these issues in our body. So I've definitely seen, for me clinically, and I already gave Laurie a heads up, I said, hey, I am pro fasting for some people, and I'm very much not pro fasting for others. And a lot of you listening might be my patients, and I've advised you not to fast for reasons we can talk about. But what Laurie, and the exact reason she's using it, is a great example of when it's incredibly appropriate. So I look out for people, if you guys are listening, people with eating disorders. I really don't think intermittent fasting is a good idea. It's another food rule for you. And they don't have, most of the time, you don't have intuitive eating. The intuitive eating is gone. And so when you have histories of, more extreme eating disorders, and a lot of our patients are very high performers and they waffle with orthorexia, this obsession with eating healthy. And so food rules can sometimes not be good for that group, even if you can eat whatever you want in a window. That window gets narrower and narrower, and then they use it as a reason to eat, 500 calories a day. So I just want our listeners to know this is not necessarily great for every single person. And the subset I talked with Laurie about, so she's already aware of my opinion of this, is some women that are still menstruating, that have hormone shifts. In the luteal phase, our body is more sensitive to stress, and fasting actually puts some stress on our body in a good way. The same way exercise puts stress on our heart in a good way, right? But we have to think about what's in our stress bucket. So, some of our patients wake up at 5 o'clock and they run 10 miles, and then they drink 3 cups of coffee, and then they don't eat till noon, and they're running around with their kids and they're stressed and they're getting to the office, they're checking emails. So it's cortisol, 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 and fasted, right? And so we always look at what are we able to take out of our bucket? Maybe it's not fasting, but maybe it's decreasing the caffeine. Maybe it's not running 10 miles. Maybe it's not getting up so early and letting your body get some more rest. So Laurie is in a very similar space. And we were talking about this before we started recording, of a very individualized approach with fasting. But I just wanted you guys to think about the full picture and just make sure that the most important thing Laurie is saying is, how do you feel? Like, make sure you're going back to that. And then also, if you have a history of eating disorders, use caution, because of my experience with some patients. But you've used the term fast clean a
Yeah.
few times. I am not familiar with that. Like, what are you referring to? Is there?
So the term the clean fast was coined by Jen Stevens, who wrote Fast, Feast, Repeat. And it came out of this, you know, debate about what's allowed while you're fasting. Well, it's kind of an absurd question because fasting is fasting. But here we are. We're human beings. We love either cutting corners or figuring out what's allowed. And so the clean fast is actually a purest fast. It's actually being in a complete fasted state. So what the clean fast is, the benefits of it, and then I'll tell you the parameters of it are that it makes fasting easier because we're not exciting the system and preparing for digestion, which makes fasting easier. And we're allowing for all the fat burning and all the deep healing, all of the autophagy, upcycling our old junky proteins. And then we're keeping insulin low and managing our blood sugar. So the clean fast is plain unflavored water, plain unflavored black coffee, plain unflavored black or green tea, plain unflavored, there's a theme here, plain unflavored electrolytes or minerals and your medications as prescribed. Now people are like, oh, can't I have this and can I have that? Yes, you can. The beauty is we're going to fast clean and keep it very binary, quiet the noise. No, can I have a little bit of this, a little bit of that, entertaining ourselves with flavors and nutrients. And you can save everything until your eating window and have what you choose later. So it's all the deep healing and fat burning, quieting the noise, being much more focused and productive in our lives, and then save the flavor party for later in your eating window. And it makes fasting easier. The other thing I want to say about people fasting or not fasting is that having a daily fast and having an eating window could be a 12-12 schedule or a 14-hour fast and a 10-hour eating window with 3 meals and a 10-hour eating window. It's a matter of having guardrails for yourself of, I don't eat before 10 a.m. or I don't eat past 9:30 p.m. Like just knowing for yourself that we're lowering inflammation, supporting the whole system when we are people who don't eat and drink flavored drinks from the second we wake up to the minute we go to bed. If we can shrink that a little bit, then we're healthier people. And Dr. Sachin Panda from the Salk Institute, he's a circadian rhythm expert. He's proven that we live longer and we feel better when we at least do a 12-12. So I assert that a person is an intermittent faster if you're conscientious about fasting clean for at least 12 hours, you're asleep for hopefully 8 of it, and keeping your eating into a 12-hour or less time frame. There are so many health benefits just for that.
And that I feel like there's no person that can't do that, right?
I agree.
So that's a big thing that we talk about is, 12 hours, 14 hours. I think where we run into more issues is the patients that are eating very narrow that don't have the same story as you, right?
Yes.
Like have you looked at research? Because I've read some of the research around intermittent fasting where you eat breakfast and you eat earlier in the day versus skipping breakfast and eating dinner. And I find that the biggest thing when I talk to my patients about this is it just doesn't work with anybody's life, right? Because people want to eat dinner together. And that was one of your variables that you ask patients is, or clients, what works for you and the people around you. So it feels that it doesn't really work for anybody to not eat dinner and eat earlier in the day. But have you seen anything in the research or have you personally experienced with that, with like eating earlier in the day versus later in the day? Or you have not seen any data on it and are indifferent on whether you eat breakfast or don't eat breakfast?
I mean, technically, we are more insulin sensitive earlier in the day. And yeah, it could be a slightly better choice in terms of our health to have an earlier eating window. But what matters is, again, what has you feel your best and what works with your life. And there's no way that I could have an early eating window. It just would not work. I am clearer and sharper and brighter when I'm in a fasted state, and I wait till later to eat. Other people, I would say 20% of my clients, even the ones in their 20s, prefer an earlier eating window.
Mm. Oh,
I'm thinking of a client who's 24 and in law school, and she opens her eating window at 10 a.m. and closes it by 3 or 4. And rarely, she'll have lunch with friends, and then sometimes so each person decides what
yes.
what they're excited about and what's going to have them feel your best. And again, when you feel as well as you possibly can, you are going to do whatever it takes to protect that.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Yes. What are some of the other things? Because you kind of guide people. So, like, what does a session with you look like? It's kind of hearing about
mm.
their current life, it's kind of hearing about their goals, what would work for them. Like, what are some of the other kind of like strategic things for our listeners to think about and consider if they're interested in starting this?
Gosh, I love that question. So, what is my coaching? In the beginning, I get a deep understanding of a person's health history and diet history, and what are the conversations that are running, their view of their body. And it's just, we live in a culture that is really locked into what I call a punishment model, which is punitive. And we live in a world of avoiding being bad and trying so hard to be good and perfectionism. And all of this is driven by diet culture, and that we really have a diet brain. And so the course of my work with a person is how to establish habits that have you be able to be a person who takes really good care of yourself right now, no matter what's happening in your life, with ease and joy, where you can trust your body and trust yourself. And it just becomes, again, a priority to feel really, really well. And one of the important aspects of my coaching is identifying where things feel punitive and things feel restrictive and hard. And I'm always listening for, where is the person struggling? And I'm going to make it better. Because having a daily eating window should really feel for a person like it's a replenishment, not a punishment. And that it's really grounding and easy and steady and stable. It can become a joy, as opposed to one more pressure and one more thing to worry about. It can be a joy to take really good care of ourselves right now.
Well, and I feel like exactly to your point, there's so many food rules. Like we try to move past the like good food versus bad food. We don't want
Right.
people to look at food that way, right? Something might not have a nutritional value, but it might have a mental health. Like you might feel better by having some birthday cake with someone and celebrating mentally, right? There's no nutritional value in that birthday cake, right? But I don't want you to think of that as good versus bad. Exactly to your point of this like punitive, where it's like, okay, I ate that cake, now I need to go run extra tomorrow morning. So I love that about the fasting, that there's permission to eat what you want within that window. I would be interested if you coach people into getting like enough protein, or like how you talk about it without it being kind of, because I imagine in my mind, some people might listen to this and be like, okay, I can eat whatever I want in my eating window and I don't eat it all during my fast. And maybe they use this as an opportunity to, I don't want to use the word be more flexible with what they're eating, but like eat literally whatever they want. Maybe their tastes are just ultra processed food and that's all they want. So now they've moved from kind of like these different diets, that we don't like to use or call and think of good or bad food, but they move from that to this eating window of whatever they want, which is now ultra processed. Is there kind of like a phase that you're like, okay, let's start narrowing in our eating window. Then let's start talking about the quality of the food to maybe think of, let's make sure we're getting enough protein, some veggies. Or do you really not spend much time in your role with the food because you feel that the fast is beneficial enough? Does that make sense?
Of course.
Okay.
So I spend most of my time talking about food. But in the beginning, okay, so most coaches and doctors and so forth will say, get your food handled and then implement an intermittent fasting schedule. I think that doesn't work because food is so emotional, so locked in good and bad and trying to be good. And what happens physiologically and mentally is here's how you start. You decide today what time you're closing your eating window. Pick a time. There's no good or right time except for when you are going to stop eating dinner, close your eating window, and after that, drink plain water. And go to sleep and add 12 hours, maybe 14, see how long you can go tomorrow, drink plain water, drink black coffee, open your eating window, eat normally. Okay, so this is where we're going to answer your question. People are like, what's normally? How do you eat normally? Well, what do you normally eat? So in the beginning, all we're doing is changing and creating a new habit of fasting clean and fasting a little longer, shrinking your eating window, moving it around, figuring out what has you feel your best and what works with your life. Then people in the beginning will overcompensate. They're like, woohoo, I can eat whatever I want. It's like very quickly, your own body tells you it does not like that. Okay. So Dr. Bert Herring, who's a metabolism expert, wrote a book called Appetite Correction, and or The Power of Appetite Correction. He coined this term, appetite correction, because we have an apostat, an appetite center in our brain that does a lot of things, but primarily regulates our hunger and satiety hormones. Our own body, because we're fasting clean and having an eating window and shrinking that eating window to have us feel our best, give us tons of energy and burn body fat. Our own body starts saying, I don't want that anymore, or it loses interest in foods that are not nutritionally contributing to our health. And our own body, our own brain says, more of this, please, more salmon, please, more broccoli, please, more apples and oranges, please. And people who are intermittent fasting for over a month plus, really through the first month to I would say 6 months, start being astonished and surprised by how our own body directs us towards the nutrients it needs and wants and loses interest. Or the body says, stop. No, I do not want that anymore. It does not make me feel well. And our body's really smart. We actually are like a wild animal where we can trust our instincts to know how much to eat and what to eat. And fasting actually starts making that very clear. I always say this is not a diet, it's a quiet. We get clearer discernment, straight communication from our own body saying more of this, less of that. And so then once a person has really settled into feeling so well in their eating window and it's flexible and they can move it around, but they know it has them feel their best, then we start talking a lot about food.
And what are some of the approaches you make with nutrition? Like, is there anything that you, as far as like protein versus vegetables versus fiber, is it more intuitive eating that you focus on? I kind of feel that you're very intuitive with our bodies are all different, paying attention to how we feel. But do you have any, like, let's say our listeners have been fasting for a while and they really haven't made any changes with the food quality. Maybe they didn't have as much changes in their appetite of what they liked than what you just described, which, by the way, that sounds fantastic. If like people just naturally stop wanting certain things. Yeah. I see this all the time when people wear a Whoop band and they start tracking their sleep with alcohol. They just all of a sudden stop wanting to drink alcohol because they see their sleep quality go down and their HRV go down and they have this, right? So I kind of think of it that way. When you just start feeling better, you start wanting to eat better. But for those listeners that aren't, and they're looking at kind of eating the best, I'm interested if you have any kind of thoughts. Everybody has different thoughts when it comes to nutrition, right? I feel like I've had people on this show that are advocates that vegan is the only way to go. I've had people on this show that believe that paleo is the only way to go, and it's very interesting. And I think the conclusion in all of that is I can find data to back so many different things, right? and
So
it varies individualized. But I just like to hear people's insight for the general person. If there are some things that you think are really important in longevity to pair with the fast.
well, I believe in bioindividuality. If people want to know exactly how their own body metabolizes protein, fat, and carbohydrates, then sign up for Zoe. And then you'll have the results that tell you how your body metabolizes protein, fat, and
Wait, hold on.
carbohydrates.
Tell me about Zoe. I don't know Zoe.
Oh, it's a test started by Tim Spector in the UK. There's a Zoe podcast. It's a test where they test your stool quality. You'll eat certain things and do a finger prick, and so you send everything in, and they give you the feedback of how your body metabolizes all the macronutrients. But if you
Wow.
don't want to do that, then here's how I've devised over the last 6 years of coaching people, how I coach people in the beginning regarding food. Make 4 columns or 4 quadrants, and each of those 4 sections are the following. The first one is your trigger foods. What are the foods that set you off, that you start eating it, you can't stop, or once you eat this, then you're rooting around for more of that? Okay, so trigger, it's a trigger, and some people are more highly affected than others by their trigger foods. So be very clear on your trigger foods. The second category is really hard for people. What are the foods that make you feel poorly? People have no idea. Okay, what makes you fatigued, gassy, achy, puffy? It's just what makes you feel poorly. And that list takes a long time to accumulate. The third category are the foods that you eat when you're rushed and exhausted. Okay, a bowl of popcorn is not dinner. Energy bar in your bag is not lunch. Okay. So, what are the foods that you eat when you're rushed and exhausted? Get very clear on that. And then the fourth category that we keep building and building and building is the foods you love that love you back. So, that takes a lot of time to discern. But I'm thinking of a client that has been intermittent fasting with me for 2.5 months right now. All she eats is ultra processed food. The last call we had this week, like 3 days ago, she said all of a sudden she's rooting around her kitchen. She's hungry. What am I going to have? And nothing sounds good. Nothing sounds good. All of a sudden her body told her it wanted apples. She's like, apples? All of a sudden she wanted apples and watermelon. She's like, who am I? Okay, that is appetite correction.
I love that.
Yeah.
So there's nothing that you specifically say to make sure someone hits enough protein, calories. Like that is really not where you go. It's more like what makes you feel good. Let's talk through this intuitive. Let's build some healthy eating patterns. Like that is more your approach when working with clients versus this is the amount of protein that you need. This is the amount it sounds.
Well, we can also look at what is on somebody's plate and see what's missing. But I coach clients who are 100% plant-based and who
Yes.
are 99% carnivore. So
Yes.
again, we're paying attention to, we all need protein, carbohydrate, and fat in high quality. We want to upgrade the quality of it. And from there, if a person is not feeling strong in their workouts, then we need to, I do think it's 100% intuitive, because when someone is at dinner, they want to be tuned into how they actually feel. Are they feeling satisfied by their food? What is missing? What more do I need? And that is not going to come from a list. It's going
Yes.
to come from tuning in.
Yes. And I think that's the problem really with all of us, me included, is like taking the time to know what your body is telling you. Like I feel like I think about my 3-year-old and 2-year-old, and they're so much more intuitive of like, I need water. I want this. Like they are just as little kids, like you look at them and they just kind of their body tells them what they need and that's what they eat.
That's right,
Versus
Kristen.
like as we've been in this world longer and we become that dopamine sugar response, like everything about what we think about what our body needs is really destroyed. So I love this kind of the appetite correction concept. I love that. I think my last question for you is around fitness and fasting? Like, do you have any, and I'm sure again, your opinion is going to be, it's very individualized, but a lot of our patients were a functional medicine and movement practice. So we do a lot of strength training, like really, really targeted, focused strength training. And we have a lot of patients that get really lightheaded when they're working out in a fasted state.
Hmm.
What do you have thoughts around that, or have you experienced that, or what are your any thoughts around fasting and fitness?
Absolutely. Excuse me. I work out myself very intensely. Sorry.
You're good.
I work out really intensely in the morning in a fasted state. And oh, my throat.
You want to take some sips
I
of
just
water?
drank some water. It went the wrong way.
Yeah, I can take this portion out. So don't, make sure you get it back.
Let's see how my voice is. Okay.
So then
So
start
I
like
work out. Yep. I work out in the morning in a fasted state. I'm 61 years old. Also, I have to tell you that I've had my biological age deeply tested, like extensive testing many times. And my biological age is less than 40 because of my mitochondrial health. So if somebody is feeling dizzy while they're working out and they're in a fasted state, my first go-to is that they're low in sodium and magnesium. And so I wake up in the morning, I have a big glass of water, I take 2 magnesium, I have a black coffee, and I work out hard. And then I don't eat until many hours later. One, because that works with my life, but two, I want to keep the fat burning going. It like really cranks up and I want to keep it going. So if somebody consistently is working out in a fasted state and is, upping their minerals and they are consistently feeling dizzy while they're working out in a fasted state, then they shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
It's just like, so don't push it. But I don't know anybody actually who doesn't eventually or ultimately feel much better exercising in a fasted state.
Well, and one, I said that was my last question, but I feel that the variables I've seen that contribute to the success of that working out in a fasted state is BMI, body fat, and body composition. So I have found that our patients that maybe have a little bit of higher fasting glucose, a little bit more adipose tissue, they have no problem working out in a fasted state. Exactly to your point, the fat burning effects. Again, we work with a lot of really high achievers that, I would argue maybe are a little underweight. And I feel that those are the people I've seen that have more issues. And I just go back to glycogen and muscle recovery and their energy stores. So that is now segueing off fitness, but on to, is there anything that you look at when it comes to BMI, body fat percent? If someone comes to you and maybe they're already at a too low of a BMI or body fat, does that play a role in the recommendation, or it's still really a very similar approach?
Oh, it's very always customized. 100%. I'm thinking of a client who is really fit and has very low body fat. And she feels figured out that she feels best working out in this particular way at this particular time and then eating right after. So we've got to go on how we feel. And so each individual, some people, it's best to have a 10-hour eating window and maybe eat 2 hours before you work out. It's unique for each person. So
there's no thing that you have as far as like if somebody's body fat is too low, they could still, if they felt great with a 4-hour eating window, that would not be.
As long as they are getting stronger and eating a lot of amazing nutritious food in that 4-hour eating window, an abundance of, amazing nutritious food, go for it. Yeah. And their weight was stable and and their health markers from liver enzymes to, if to triglycerides. So
your clients track things like muscle mass or things like that. Do you find like muscle mass is affected at all by this, or no, it normally improves?
It normally improves because when you're in a fasted state, the human growth hormone production cranks up. And so we're building and muscle and bone density when we're in a fasted state. And then you're lifting heavy objects and moving and sleeping well and eating nutritious food in your eating window and burning body fat when you're in your fasting hours. And lowering inflammation and boosting immunity. I mean, it's if you can discover your fasting and eating sweet spot that has you feel your best, this is an extraordinary way to live.
Do you have any thoughts on Prolon being, the fasting mimicking diet? Are you
Oh,
familiar with it?
I have some
Research.
thoughts.
Yeah. Tell me.
Eating isn't fasting.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's ultra processed food. I love Walter Longo. I love the research that he's doing. He's really an amazing doctor. And eating isn't fasting. And
Yeah.
I would really rather have people eat real whole food. If you want to fast for 5 days, have a coach support you with that, be medically supervised, and do an actual legitimate 72-hour, fast or 5-day fast, clean, ramp up
Yeah.
autophagy, like get all the healing benefits from that, and then keep an eating window or do alternate daily fasting. Look up the work of Krista Verde in Chicago. Yeah, eating isn't fasting. It's
Yeah.
something else. It's
It's
taking
just
in nutrients.
interesting. They put so much money into research. So they have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
publications with CRP and triglycerides and cholesterol and blood pressure. And, again, we're very like evidence based. So some of our patients
Yeah.
that don't want to fast all the time, it's been a great tool for them cardiometabolically.
Yes.
But I hear what you're saying that it's not fasting, obviously, because you're eating, but it does drop to 700 calories, which is where they
Mm-hmm.
did the research on the autophagy, is that got them into the threshold of having the benefits of autophagy while still eating. So the research around it is really pretty cool, but
Yeah.
I do understand it's not fasting, right? You're eating.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts for us as we kind of wrap up this episode?
I just think it's so important for us to keep things as simple as possible. And when people get scattered and overwhelmed and don't know what to believe, I just say, okay, bring it back, breathe. There are two parts to every day. You can always orient yourself and feel better fasting clean, know when your eating window is today, listen to your body, eat to satiety. Don't eat when you're doing something else. Savor your food. It's so amazing. We live in this time where we have this abundance of healthful food at our fingertips, and people really deserve to have all the benefits of honoring the integrity of our body, giving it a rest, a digestive rest, time to heal, and then eat all the delicious, nutritious food that you love in your eating window.
I
It's
love it.
just a great way to live.
Thank you so much, Laurie. It's great to have you on the show. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Kristen.